It seems like everywhere you turn these days, everyone's talking about AI.
Yeah.
And for good reason, too, right? It feels like every day there's a new breakthrough. But one of the areas that's really caught my eye is the rise of these unified models. The ones that can not just understand information, but actually generate new content.
Yeah. It's a pretty remarkable shift we're seeing.
It really is. And what's even more fascinating is that it's not just limited to text anymore. We're seeing this convergence of different modalities, images, audio, you name it. It's all becoming interconnected in these powerful systems.
Exactly. And that's what makes this field so exciting to work in right now. We're moving away from these specialized AI models that were good at one specific thing and into this new era of generalized models that can tackle a wide range of tasks.
Absolutely. It's like the AI landscape is undergoing this massive transformation right before our eyes.
It really is. And the shift has huge implications for how we develop and use AI systems in the future. It's opening up a whole new world of possibilities.
And that brings us perfectly to today's deep dive.
Yeah.
We're going to be taking a close look at a research report on Janus-Pro. Have you heard about this?
Oh, absolutely. This is some really cutting-edge stuff.
Yeah, and Janus-Pro is a new unified model developed by Deepseek AI. Now, this model actually builds on their previous work called Janus. And the claims they're making about its performance are pretty mind-blowing. They're saying it's a major leap forward in both understanding and generating content across different modalities.
And they have the benchmarks to back it up, too. Achieving state-of-the-art results on a variety of tasks.
It's impressive. And what's particularly intriguing is its unique architecture, specifically the way they're using something called decoupled visual encoding.
Right, and as we'll see, this approach is key to why it performs so well in both understanding and generating visual content.
I'm sure our listeners are eager to get into the technical nuts and bolts of all of this. But before we do, I think it's important to take a step back and ask a fundamental question. What exactly can Janus-Pro do?
Okay, good question. Well, in a nutshell, Janus-Pro is designed to handle a wide range of tasks involving both text and images. Think about things like image captioning. So you show it a picture, and it can accurately describe what's happening in that image.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, or visual question answering. So you can ask it questions about an image, and it'll use the information in that image to give you the answer. And get this, it can even generate images from text descriptions. So you can basically give it instructions, and it'll create entirely new visual content based on what you tell it.
So it's not just recognizing objects in an image. It's about actually understanding the relationships between visual and textual information, and then using that understanding to both interpret and create new content. That's incredible.
It really is. And this is one of the things that sets Janus-Pro apart from other unified models. It's this innovative approach to visual encoding. Instead of using a single encoder for both understanding and generating images, it actually uses separate specialized encoders.
Okay, hold on. I need to make sure I'm following this. You're talking of this concept of decoupled visual encoding, right?
Right.
Why have separate encoders? What's the advantage of that?
Imagine you're looking at a really complex painting. Think about all the things you'd have to do to understand it. You have to analyze the composition, the brush strokes, the colors, the interplay of light and shadow.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It is right. And you're essentially extracting high-level features to try to grasp the meaning behind it, the message the artist is trying to convey. But now imagine you're trying to paint a replica of that same painting. You'd have to focus on totally different aspects.
Right. The precise color palettes, the texture of the canvas, the way the paint is applied to create specific effects. I see what you're saying. It's like using different lenses to view the same piece of art. One lens helps you understand the deeper meaning, while the other helps you recreate the technical aspects of its creation.
Exactly, you got it. And that's the whole idea behind decoupled visual encoding. By having separate encoders, Janus-Pro can optimize each one for its specific task, whether it's extracting those high-level features for understanding or capturing all those fine-grained visual details needed for generation. So basically, it can excel in both domains without having to make compromises.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, I know the research paper goes into quite a bit of detail with an architecture diagram, figure 3, if I'm not mistaken. It lays out all the different components of Janus-Pro. And it would be great if we could walk our listeners through that visually. Because there's the SIGLIP encoder, the VQ tokenizers, these things called adapters, and then at the heart of it all, the LLM. Can you break down these moving parts for us?
Okay, sure. Let's start with the understanding pathway. So we have an image, and the first thing that happens is that image goes through the SIGLIP encoder. And this encoder is responsible for extracting those high-level semantic features we were just talking about. So it takes the raw pixels of the image as input and processes it through a series of layers, convolutional layers, that gradually transform that pixel-level information into this rich, abstract representation of what the image is actually about.
Well, and then what? What happens to that representation?
Well, that's where those adapters come in.
Ah, yes. The adapters. Before we go any further, can we just pause for a second and make sure we're all on the same page about what these adapters actually do? They seem to be a pretty important part of this whole architecture.
Oh, they're crucial. Think of them as bridges between the visual world and the language world.
Okay.
So the cyclip encoder that we were just talking about outputs a visual representation. But the LLM, which is a language model that operates in the domain of text.
Right.
So we need a way to connect those two worlds. And that's where the adapters come in. They act as translators. They convert those visual features into a format that the LLM can actually understand and process.
So they're creating this common language that both the visual encoder and the language model can communicate with.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
That's pretty clever.
It is, right.
So what about the generation side of things? I know we have this VQ tokenizer and another adapter involved there.
Right. So instead of trying to reconstruct an image pixel by pixel, the VQ tokenizer kind of breaks the image down into these discrete visual tokens, kind of similar to how words are tokenized in language models. And these tokens are then mapped to embeddings, which are basically vectors that represent the visual information contained in each token.
So instead of dealing with this continuous stream of pixel data, we're working with these discrete, manageable units of visual information. That seems like it would make the generation process a lot more efficient.
It does, and those visual embeddings are then fed through their own adapter, which again translates the visual language into something the LLM can understand.
Got it. So at that point, the LLM has everything it needs. It takes the semantic understanding from the cyclip encoder, the visual building blocks from the VQ tokenizer, and uses its vast knowledge base to either generate a description of the image or create a brand new image based on the instructions it's given.
That's exactly right. The LLM is where the magic happens, you could say. It's really the core of Janus-Pro, and its ability to process both visual and textual information in this unified way is what makes this model so powerful.
Now, you mentioned earlier that this decoupled encoding approach was key to Janus-Pro's high performance. Can you elaborate on that a bit more? Why is this architectural choice so significant?
Sure, well, think about it this way. When you have a single encoder that has to do both understanding and generation, it inevitably has to make compromises.
Oh, I see.
It has to learn to represent both those high-level semantic features and the low-level visual details, which can sometimes conflict during training.
So it's trying to do too many things at once.
Yeah, exactly. But with decoupled encoders, Janus-Pro can optimize each encoder for its specific task. So there's no compromise, and it results in better performance overall.
So it's all about specialization.
Yeah.
Allowing each component to focus on what it does best and contribute its unique strengths to the overall performance of the model. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and this specialization really shows up when we look at the performance benchmarks, which we'll get to in a bit. But before we do that, I think it's worth talking about how Janus-Pro improves upon its predecessor, Janus.
Right. They've made a number of key enhancements to this new model. I know they talk about optimized training, data scaling, and model scaling. Let's start with the training process. They've gone from a 3-stage process to a more efficient 2-stage process. What's the significance of that?
Well, the original Janus model required 3 separate training stages, each with its own set of objectives and computational demands. And this new 2-stage process really streamlines the training, making it much more efficient.
So it's faster and requires less computational power.
Exactly. Which means it could potentially make this technology more accessible to a wider range of researchers and developers.
That's fascinating. So they've managed to achieve better performance with a more streamlined training process. That's pretty impressive.
It is, and it also raises an interesting question. Could this 2-stage training approach be applied to other multimodal models?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, so we might see a real acceleration in the development and deployment of advanced AI systems across different fields.
It's like they've discovered a shortcut to training these complex models. And that could have ripple effects throughout the whole field of AI.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of efficiency, let's talk about data scaling for a moment.
Right. The researchers significantly expanded the data set used to train Janus-Pro. And it wasn't just about adding more data. They actually diversified it, incorporating a much wider range of modalities and tasks.
Exactly. They wanted to give it a much richer and more diverse training experience.
And I was particularly interested in the fact that they included data sets for things like table and chart understanding, document understanding, even meme understanding.
Oh, yeah, that's fascinating.
It seems like they're really pushing the boundaries of what these models can comprehend. Can you give us some concrete examples of the kinds of new tasks that Janus-Pro can handle because of this expanded data set?
So imagine Janus-Pro not only being able to caption an image of, say, a cat, but also extracting key insights from a complex financial report, understanding the relationships between different data points in a scientific chart, or even deciphering the humor behind a meme.
It's mind-blowing, isn't it? They're really pushing toward a model that can truly understand and interact with the world in a much more human-like way.
They are. And on the generation side, they've also incorporated a lot of synthetic data, which has helped improve the quality and stability of the image generation outputs.
Now connect this to the bigger picture for us. We're seeing this trend of data scaling across different areas of AI. How important is data scale for advancing these models, and do you think this trend is going to continue?
Well, data is like food for AI. The more high quality and diverse data you feed it, the better it becomes at understanding those complex patterns, generalizing to new situations, and ultimately performing its tasks more effectively. And I think this trend of data scaling is definitely going to continue. As AI models become more sophisticated, we'll need even larger and more diverse data sets to really push the limits of what's possible.
So more data equals more intelligence, essentially.
In a way, yes, but there's another aspect of scaling that's important here too, and that's model scaling.
Right. Janus-Pro has made a big jump in terms of model size, going from a 1.5 billion parameter LLM to a 7 billion parameter LLM. What are the implications of this?
Think of the model size as a measure of its complexity and its capacity for learning. A larger model has more parameters, which means it can capture more intricate relationships within the data and develop a deeper understanding of the patterns. This allows it to handle more nuanced tasks, generate more creative outputs, and potentially even discover new patterns that smaller models might miss.
So it's like expanding the neural network's brain power, giving it more capacity to process, learn, and adapt.
Exactly. And if you look at Table 1 in the paper, it actually shows the performance gains they achieved with this model scaling.
Now, while it's exciting to see those performance gains, I imagine that larger models come with their own set of challenges too, right?
No, absolutely. And one of the biggest is computational cost. Training and running these massive models requires a lot of computing power, which means higher energy consumption and higher costs.
That raises some important questions about accessibility and sustainability, doesn't it?
It does. As we push towards larger and more powerful models, we need to be mindful of the resources required and think about the environmental impact as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's not just about building bigger models, it's about building smarter models and finding more sustainable ways to train and use them.
Exactly. It's about striking that balance between performance efficiency and accessibility.
That's a really important point. Now, we've covered a lot of ground here just in terms of understanding the architecture of Janus-Pro and the key improvements they've made. But I know our listeners are probably wondering how all of this translates into real-world performance.
Well, that's the exciting part, right? And that's where the benchmarks come in.
Perfect. So let's dive into that next. We'll be back in a moment to continue our exploration of Janus-Pro. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty here. The report really dives deep into how Janus-Pro stacks up against the competition. And to be honest, some of these benchmarks are pretty impressive.
Oh yeah, they're definitely eye-catching. They really put this model through its paces, evaluating it on a wide range of tasks and comparing it to some of the top models out there.
Let's start with multimodal understanding. Table 3 in the report shows the results on benchmarks like GQA, PPE, and MME. Now, these benchmarks are designed to test a model's ability to go beyond just recognizing objects in an image. They're looking at whether the model can understand the relationships between those objects, the context of the scene, even the underlying story that's being told.
Right. It's about moving beyond simple object detection or image captioning into a deeper level of visual comprehension. And this is where Janus-Pro really starts to stand out.
Yeah, the numbers are pretty compelling. Across these really challenging benchmarks, Janus-Pro consistently outperforms other unified models, even those with much larger LLMs. I was particularly struck by its performance on MME perception and MM-Bench. These seem to focus on complex reasoning and understanding across different modalities, and Janus-Pro just blows the competition out of the water.
Those are two of the toughest benchmarks out there, and they're designed to really simulate real-world scenarios where an AI system needs to understand and reason about this complex multimodal information. So for example, MME perception tests a model's ability to answer open-ended, multi-turn questions about an image, kind of like you would in a conversation with a human.
So it's not just understanding a static image, it's about understanding the dynamics of a scene and being able to have a conversation about it.
Exactly. And MMBench takes it even further. It evaluates a model's ability to perform a whole bunch of different tasks involving images, text, even video. So Janus-Pro's strong performance on these benchmarks is a really good indicator that it has this robust and versatile understanding of multimodal information.
Now let's switch gears and talk about visual generation for a minute. The report includes results from Geneval and DPG Bench. These are two benchmarks that are designed to assess a model's ability to create images from text descriptions. How does Janus-Pro do in this area?
Well, again, the results are very promising. It shows significant improvement over its predecessor, Janus, and it actually performs quite well compared to other popular models like DALL-E 3 and Stable Diffusion. So on Geneval, which focuses on these compositional capabilities and following complex instructions, Janus-Pro 7b achieves a really impressive 80% overall accuracy.
That's putting it ahead of some pretty well-established models, right?
It is, yeah. And the report doesn't just stick to quantitative metrics, it also shows some really compelling qualitative results. Figure 4 in particular is this really cool visual showcase of Janus-Pro's image generation capabilities. And it's fascinating to see how it handles a variety of different text prompts, everything from these simple object descriptions to these more imaginative, abstract scenes.
I was looking at that figure earlier, and what struck me is how it seems to balance this photorealism with artistic interpretation. So for prompts like a steaming cup of coffee on a wooden table, it generates images that are incredibly detailed and realistic. It captures the textures, the lighting, even the steam rising from the cup. But it also does a great job with these more creative and open-ended prompts like astronaut in a jungle.
Yeah.
Generating images that are not only visually stunning, but they also have this imaginative quality to them.
Yeah, it's like it understands the essence of the prompt and then adds its own creative spin on it, creating images that are both faithful to the